Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second Garner Forward UDO Rewrite public meeting. If you're joining us live today, you will have the opportunity to submit some questions in Facebook, and we'll go ahead and try to address those today. Otherwise, if you're watching this as a recording, there will be a link on the project's website for you to contact our team, and we'll get questions answered to you again. For those of you who may not be familiar with Garner Forward and our UDO rewrite process, we did undertake a few years ago an update to our comprehensive plan. And out of that, of course, came some revised goals and objectives that the town would like to see for the development community going forward. And so now we are in the process of rewriting our rules and regulations that will help us implement those revised goals and objectives. And so again, this is our second public meeting, and I will say that you can find all this information by going to our website, which is garnernc.gov. Once you're there, you just click on departments, or don't even have to click on it, just hover over it. That'll bring up this drop menu. You can go over to the planning department, and right underneath planning is the very first link is Garner Forward, which is about the entire process. So if you click on that, it'll take you to a new page. You'll see links to our current comprehensive plan and transportation plans, as well as this link here to the Garner Forward UDO Rewrite project page. And so this is where we keep all of the information regarding this project, and this is where you will find the links to communicate with us going forward. As noted previously, we will have a question and answer period at the end. So again, please feel free to submit any questions and comments in the chat window. And from here, I will go ahead and turn it over to our consulting team from Stewart Incorporated. They'll be going over the progress that we've made since the first meeting and highlight areas that the project team that we're particularly interested in getting your feedback on. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jay McLeod with Stewart Inc. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm going to bring up the presentation here and walk through the highlights of the changes to the zoning and land use regulation articles of the Garner Unified Development Ordinance. So previously we've discussed changes that have been proposed for the kind of administrative articles of the Unified Development Ordinance, or UDO, related to administration, review procedures, nonconformities, enforcement of the UDO, and other kind of more back-of-house administrative aspects. But now we're going to talk about the proposed revisions to the zoning districts and land use regulation sections, which are a little bit more what people think about when they think about the Unified Development Ordinance and about zoning in general. So this presentation is going to kind of go through the status of where the project is to date with a little bit of background on how we got here. Then we're going to talk about the highlights to the zoning districts and use regulation. And then we're going to close with kind of a preview of the draft rezoning map and how citizens can get involved in kind of making sure that that is accurate and as correct as possible when it is reviewed by the council in winter of this coming year, this year. And then we'll also discuss other opportunities for public involvement, like the online public survey. So to start out, and just a reminder, UDO stands for Unified Development Ordinance. This is the project team. There's a number of planners in Stewart in the municipal planning group. Generally speaking, Stewart is mostly engineers and surveyors and geotechnical experts and construction administration professionals. But we do also have a small group of planners there that are helping with this Unified Development Ordinance update. And we do also consult with our civil engineering group and landscape architects as needed to make sure that each section of the UDO is as succinct and accurate as possible. We've been working in close contact with the Garner planning staff, as well as a core group of steering committee appointed by the council and a technical advisory staff at the staff level. You can see the project timeline here, and kind of the big takeaway is that we're in the first quarter of 2021. We're on target. We're talking today about the zoning districts and use regulation update language. And in the near future, we'll be talking about landscaping, parking, site design, and environmental regulations. And then you'll be looking at the draft rezoning map update kind of closing out in the third quarter of this year. And then the adoption hearings happening later in this year, probably in the third and fourth quarter. Kind of as a reminder, this project also involved a Chapter 160D update, which to make the town's ordinances in alignment with recently passed state legislation. Those revisions are going to be heard by council shortly to be adopted. And they were previously heard at a work session, I believe, earlier this month on the 1st. But the focus of this presentation is on zoning, use regulation, and district dimensional standards and development standards, like setbacks and building heights and minimum lot widths. Previous public engagement has involved a public town hall informational meeting like this. Obviously, COVID has kind of affected somewhat the number of in-person meetings we can have, but this has actually worked out quite well, and we've noticed a lot of viewership of both the presentation in real time and also later on as it's posted to the project website and available to be viewed at leisure. And also there are contact points on the planning department website that Jeff mentioned earlier where people can email their comments or call planning department staff and ask any questions and convey any thoughts they might have. There is a steering committee, as I said, who's a number of members of the community that have expertise in one area or another of the UDO. And then also, of course, we had the extensive public engagement that went into the comprehensive plan, which was adopted in 2018. And it's very common and advisable, actually, for communities to go through a comprehensive plan update and then initiate a unified development ordinance update to bring those recommendations and policies identified in the comprehensive plan into action in the community. So we're kind of right in line with the best practices on that, in terms of bringing those community approved and council approved recommendations into the kind of the law of the land where the rubber meets the road with the Unified Development Ordinance. In addition, the project involves some community tour and stakeholder interviews. I'm not going to read all these items to you, but they were discussed as we drove around the community, took character images, looked at places in town that were working and that were not working as desired, and areas for improvement and areas that were doing great and should serve as a model for other development. We also interviewed focus group members representing different kind of interests in the community to get their perspective. These are people that are heavily involved with the Unified Development Ordinance and use it regularly, like elected and appointed boards, and I think it was just appointed boards and other professionals in the community. So we got their perspective as well as we were embarking on this process. And as I mentioned before, we have the guidance from the adopted plans, both the comprehensive transportation plan and the comprehensive plan itself. And those involved a number of other goals that were identified for implementation. General recommendations from the Garner Forward Comprehensive Plan involved consolidating similar and overlapping zoning districts, increasing the flexibility of uses within each district, and modernizing the zoning districts so that they're more responsive to what the type of development applications that are actually walking through the door, and so that it's basically a better acknowledgement of the current status on the ground of what the market is in demand of, to make sure that then the council and staff and the boards that hear these items can have an option and have some guidance from the UDO to turn to when needed. In the comprehensive plan, relative to what we're going to talk about today, which was the zoning district realignments and the use regulation realignments, there was an identified need to support affordable housing, including different housing types other than just single-family detached residential. A desire to promote multifamily housing, and by that we're talking about apartments, townhomes, condominiums, and the like. And to emphasize new growth areas, create walkable mixed-use places so that people can walk to the goods and services they need, and to encourage mixed-use and shared-use developments, and that being primarily things like vertical mix of uses where you have, a non-residential use in the bottom, like a retail shop or a coffee shop or some sort of business, and then above you have either offices or residential units. So we're going to get right now into the highlights of the updates to these 3 particular articles that are kind of being merged into 2 articles. And I'm going to start with explaining to you about the residential districts and what's happened there. First off, we've kind of collapsed the tables and made them more user-friendly and added user-friendly diagrams and figures. What you're looking at here describes the different residential districts across the top, and then the standards for those districts in terms of setbacks from the front, side, and rear, minimum lot widths, maximum gross density, so that's the number of homes per acre. One of the major transitions in this UDO update is moving away from minimum lot size and moving towards using density, which is number of homes per acre, and minimum lot width to regulate the intensity of the development as well as the character of the development. And you can see with these diagrams here, it should be a lot easier for the user to identify what regulations apply to their particular parcel or inquiry. As mentioned, the residential districts are being kind of consolidated, a few of them. In the current districts on the left, the number corresponded to the minimum lot size. As discussed, we are moving away from that towards a gross density regulation. So in the proposed districts on the right, the number actually stands for how many dwelling units per acre you would expect to see in a single-family detached residential development. So that's kind of your typical single-family residential neighborhood. The R40 is being renamed residential agriculture, and it's going to continue to be 1 dwelling unit per acre, so 1 home per acre. The R20, which requires currently a 20,000 square foot minimum lot size, is going to transition to an R2 district, which is 2 dwelling units an acre. And essentially, you know, that's about the same, right? Because there's 43,560 square feet in an acre, and half of that's more or less 20,000 square feet. The big change here, though, is that the R15, R12, and R9 are going to be collapsed into one district called R4 that's going to allow about 4 homes per acre. Now, if you had a new tract of land and you subtracted out the land that's needed for roads and other infrastructure, you would wind up with, if you developed the whole thing, probably about 8,800 square foot lots. Basically, though, this new R4 district means that developers will be able to set the lot size to meet their product. So if a developer wanted to provide open spaces that were connected throughout the neighborhood and meandered and had trails and so forth as part of their development type, then they could do that and reduce the lot sizes to something less than 8,800 square feet. But they wouldn't be able to put any more homes than would otherwise be allowed because we're regulated at 4 units per acre. And then there's a new district here that's being introduced. R8 would be 8 units per acre. This would be fairly small lot sizes. It would be a pretty urban context, so homes pretty tightly packed. As we'll see in a little bit, we have some character images of what that might look like. This would allow more urban downtown residential development. This would be kind of in areas closer to major activity centers, so people could be really close to where they want to walk and, you know, have that kind of third place outside of their house where they spend a lot of time. This district is not really being mapped in the draft rezoning that's going to happen with this update, but it is going to be an option for the council moving forward in the future, and for the development community, if they desire to make something that has this character, it's going to be an option that they can request this district and then develop within those standards. So here are kind of some character images of what these might look like. The R4, the 2 zoning districts are across the top. R4 is the left-hand column and R8 is the right-hand column. In our new scheme, well, in the new proposed development types, a person could have an R4 district and then develop it as either a front-loaded, where the cars come in from the front, or alley-loaded, where the cars are parked in the rear with access to an alley. There are reduced setbacks if you have an alley-loaded development to compensate for the fact that there's additional right-of-way in the back and you don't need to have cars or driveways in the front. And those would kind of look more or less like what you see there. And I know that the R4 alley-loaded product there actually has a side-loaded unit on driveway on the back there, but you can kind of get an idea for how far apart the buildings might be and how that might feel. And a lot of Garner really kind of falls within this R4 style development. Obviously, we do have a variety beyond that as we get up in the 20,000 and 1 acre lots, 20,000 square foot. And then on the right-hand side, you see how that R8 district might look. It's more tightly packed, it's more urban, and actually, because of other design controls within the UDO, it would be pretty difficult to get a front-loaded R8 district, because we don't want one driveway after another to the point where people can't park on the street, and that they clog up the street, and then garbage trucks and service vehicles have a tough time getting around. So really, when you see an R8 rezoning, it'll probably be forced to go to that alley-loaded development style in order to maximize the density or build that kind of urban style of housing, and that's really what we kind of want. I mean, there's still an option to do front-loaded, but really we kind of want an alley-loaded product when we're getting to be that dense and that urban. You know, some of you might be wondering if R15, R12, and R9 are all being remapped to that R4 district, how that might affect your neighborhood if, say, for instance, there was a larger lot on the block and a developer or someone purchased that and then wanted to scrape it and subdivide it because it happened to be large enough to where it could be subdivided. Well, that was a question that our steering committee asked, and so the Garner staff, primarily Brian Godfrey, but also other members of staff, performed an ad hoc analysis and looked at all the parcels in town, did a selection to pull out those that were at least double-sized parcels or greater, and then kind of the question was, how many of our existing parcels in their current zoning districts, R9, R12, and R15, could be purchased, demolished, subdivided, and rebuilt, and still meet the zoning district standards for the one they're in. So for instance, if I have an R15 parcel, and my house sits on, let's say, 30,000, 31, 32,000 square feet, could I take that parcel, bulldoze the house, divide it in half, and build 2 houses? And that was kind of the question. And then the question that followed that would be, now if all these areas were rezoned to R4, the new zoning district, how many parcels would then be potentially vulnerable to this kind of redevelopment? And what Brian found was, and what we all kind of analyzed at the steering committee level, was that under current standards, about 5 or 6% of the existing lots could potentially have that happen. They're already pretty big. There's a lot of big lots out there. A lot of Garner developed in a time where people weren't trying to necessarily maximize the lot count of a new development. And so about 5 or 6%, you know, 1 in 20 or so, of these parcels could have that happen. Now, under the new proposed R4 district, which regulates density, but also has lot width, minimum lot width requirements, if you apply that same analysis, really maybe about 8% of those parcels could have that happen. So when you look at that difference, it's about 2.3% overall. And so our conclusion from that was that although there is a potential for maybe more of that kind of redevelopment, it's not so significant as to impede this process or to cause a major uproar. And of course, an analysis like this doesn't consider anything like the willingness of a seller to sell their property. It doesn't consider HOA covenants or neighborhood covenants, which would further restrict a subdivision of land within those boundaries. And so overall, we don't think that this is going to be an issue that's going to be any different than the type of redevelopment Garner has seen in years past. The other side of the residential districts is the multifamily and mobile homes. I'll kind of start with multifamily. We already have 2 existing multifamily districts, MF1 and MF2. These are kind of being further refined so that there is a better distinction between what they are intended for. So the MF1 district, which most of the multifamily in Garner will be remapped to, or is proposed to be remapped to, is more low impact, that meaning like lower building heights, more suburban in nature, larger yards, etc., setback from the street. These are pretty house scale townhomes, triplexes and quadplexes, smaller townhome developments. It's basically most of the townhomes or apartments that you see in Garner today. The MF2 district is being refined to be a more urban style townhome and apartment district, a larger number of units, taller buildings sometimes in certain districts, pulled up closer to the street and the sidewalk so that you have a more walkable neighborhood with the parking in the rear or center to the block or development. And so that's kind of how these have been distinguished. And you can see an example of the MF1 on the left here, and an example of what an MF2 might look like on the right here. And you can see they're very different contexts, and you probably won't expect to see MF2 proliferate all around the town, but it's the kind of development style, higher density apartments that you would want to see around your activity centers, right up around your, on the outskirts of downtown perhaps, or in the outskirts of a high intensity commercial area, so that the people in those apartments can be within walking distance of the places that they want to visit and patronize, and they don't have to necessarily hop in their car to go there. And in turn, those residents would support the businesses that are right around the corner from them. And in terms of the current mobile home zoning district, nothing is really changing there. It's just being carried forward in its current form. So I do want to make a distinction here about two different types of multifamily residential that's kind of proposed. One is kind of this house scale multifamily, and that would be 3 or 4 units, dwelling units per building. So either 3 or 4 townhomes in a row or up to 4 apartments together. And the difference really being there how parking and entrances are. And if it's multifamily, less than a 2,500 square foot footprint. So not more than 3 stories tall, and then these can be front or alley loaded. And you see kind of a picture there on the bottom left. And these are kind of more your lower impact multifamily. This was one of the goals of the comprehensive plan, was to kind of increase multifamily options to provide a range of affordability and different housing styles. And this was kind of a reaction to that, to create a type of multifamily that could fit in easily on the outskirts of existing neighborhoods perhaps, or maybe even inside an existing neighborhood as kind of a one-off, a single instance, depending if the conditions were right. And then also, on the right-hand side, you see kind of the rest of the multifamily, whether it's large, 6 or 8 townhomes in a row, or a larger apartment complex. And the heights of these are regulated by the district. And so if a person were going to build an apartment building or a large townhome development in the MF1 district, it would be 3 stories tall, up to 3 stories tall. And if it was in the MF2 district, it could be up to 60 feet tall, which is more or less about 5 stories. So the building on the right that you see there would be pretty representative of what we would desire to see in the MF2 district if it were to develop. And so the table of permitted uses, which is in this series of articles, does kind of capture that nuance, and it gives guidance as to where uses are permitted or required to go through additional scrutiny. This is kind of the first few rows of that table of permitted uses. And on the top, you see the different zoning districts across RA, R2, R4, R8, etc. The multifamily districts, MF1, MF2, and then our non-residential and mixed-use districts, which Allison will go over in a second. And then on the left-hand side, you see the different uses, and these uses all have definitions, and you see here that single-family detached residential use is permitted in every zoning district except MF2 and the non-residential and mixed-use districts. P stands for permitted. You see here also that those house-scale townhomes and house-scale multifamily that I mentioned are kind of allowed to exist in some of the more single-family dominant residential zoning districts. But again, we have design controls that will make sure that those fit into the neighborhood they are in a lot better than if they were just plopped in from outer space. And some of those neighborhood and site design controls are this. So for instance, all residential have additional rear setbacks for double frontage lots. That's when there's a road on the front and rear of the property. Rear and alley loaded parking as a development style is only allowed if at least 60% of the block is also rear or alley loaded. And that's to ensure that you don't have kind of that staggered development style, one front loaded house and then an alley loaded and then a front and then an alley, and it would look be awkward and be an awkward kind of streetscape. There are additional standards for single family and duplex involving leaving sufficient space for future expansions by homeowners. And there are limits on front yard impervious surfaces to make sure that somebody's entire front yard doesn't become a driveway, for instance. Townhomes and multifamily also have design standards. Whenever the lot's average lot width is less than 40 feet, alley-loaded development is required, and that prevents, like I said earlier, people from not being able to park on the street and clogging up the streets and not being able to get fire trucks or garbage trucks or UPS down the roadway. There's also a distinction, like I said, between house scale and large scale multifamily. There's context-sensitive design standards where appropriate, and then additional setbacks and height restrictions when multifamily is located adjacent to single-family residential development. And the purpose of that is to make sure that we don't have a multifamily development going into a neighborhood and then towering over its single-family housing neighbor. We want these developments to fit in and to have a very low degree of incompatibility at the property line. There are also standards, and these have been revised for accessory dwelling units, and this is whether or not someone can have kind of a separate side apartment or garage apartment or other rentable space or leasable space on their property. There's a lot of concern about accessory dwelling units these days with making sure that people can bring their aging parents to live with them in their final years without having to necessarily have those parents have their own lot to take care of or be in an assisted living facility, as well as the idea of diversifying income for residents that are looking to diversify their income streams and or rent a small unit on the side of their house, or perhaps even for adult children to live in. There are some standards there, most notably are the ones listed here, that kind of make sure that there is a compatibility in the neighborhood. And it's not necessarily that everyone who has a lot is guaranteed the ability to have an accessory dwelling unit. It depends on the size of their lot, if they can provide additional parking spaces off-street, and the fact that the owner needs to reside on premises to make sure that it's not just kind of a way to double a rental income for someone who's renting a home. And now I'm going to pass this over for a little bit to Allison Evans. She's one of the planners with our municipal planning group, and she's going to walk you through the standards and the new standards and proposed standards for the non-residential and mixed-use districts.
Thank you, Jay. So for non-residential and mixed-use districts, you'll notice we are not just calling them non-residential because the comp plan guidance that we were operating under encourages this mixed use. We wanted to add more housing availability, as Jay said, and more flexibility within each of these districts. So we are operating under the comp plan guidance to consolidate and simplify the 8 existing non-residential and mixed-use districts and to expand the uses within each district to accommodate changing development demands. You'll notice that the industrial districts are largely unchanged. Those have been working for Garner as they are. And we have also established a new high-intensity activity center district that will encourage more intense redevelopment at key locations. We will be discussing that one in depth in a few slides. So, although this looks a little complicated, this is actually how we are streamlining the non-residential zoning districts. You can see at the bottom the industrials largely are the same, and then we have these 4 commercial districts, mixed-use districts, based on what was existing before. So we have neighborhood office and neighborhood commercial going into neighborhood commercial. We have community retail going into commercial mixed use. And we have CBD changing to traditional business district. So instead of just being central business district, the center of downtown Garner, people will be able to use that district and adopt that character in different areas around town. So again, just to review, most of these districts, and the ones we'll be discussing in most detail, are the activity center, that one that will not be remapped yet, that's the more high intensity use one, the traditional business district, which is formerly the central business district, commercial mixed use, and neighborhood commercial. So neighborhood commercial is consolidating the existing neighborhood commercial and neighborhood office uses. It's more small scale residential compatible uses like offices and hair salons with some residential uses mixed in. So those are your less intense uses. So there'll be low impact in a transitional area where you're going from residential to commercial areas. The commercial mixed use will be a heavier retail focused district. It is previously community retail. It now includes services and offices from that business district and O&I before, allowing that flexibility that the comp plan wanted to introduce. One example you can think of is Aversboro Square. Your grocery stores will be in here, a lot of your shopping, and it'll be a little more common along thoroughfares as opposed to near residential areas. So this traditional business district is really what you think of when you think of downtown Garner. We wanted to keep that character but make it available in other locations around town. Like we mentioned earlier, there will be residential allowed in this one with on the upper stories, not on the lower stories. And finally, the industrial districts, I-1 and I-2, are remaining largely unchanged. The difference between these two being that I-2 allows outdoor industrial uses. So that's your most intense uses that we want, farther away from where everyone is living. So this activity center, this new one that's not being mapped, it's our most intense commercial and mixed-use district. It allows a little more flexibility in redevelopment. We want to encourage and support high-density redevelopment and transit-oriented development. You can see it will have a more urban character where it's used. Those buildings are pulled up right on the street, similar to how they are in the TBD and the MF2 districts. So again, this district is based on guidance from the comprehensive plan. It proposed a few locations where it might be appropriate. Again, we're not going to be designating any areas as this district currently. Any project that comes in will likely be the result of a lot of discussion between the developer and the town and the public, and will involve a larger area, and will be really intended to create a placemaking. So in that regard, placemaking, design, we really want these areas and all of our new districts to be well designed. The document is proposing some design standards for these areas, and AC and TBD in particular. One standard we're debating is these building step-backs for towers. It will only be used on towers 8 feet or 8 stories or higher to step back and preserve light and air to the ground floor and to the street. So it's it does feel not as intense as it might if those towers were right against the street. So, and in that regard, we will be being sure to create streetscape standards that are integrated and appropriate for each district. This won't be, you won't find an 8-story tower on a skinny little street. So those are going to be integrated and work together. Another design standard that the document is proposing is facade transparency standards. These are very common in more pedestrian-focused shop front areas to keep those active facades, and to create conditions like you see in that picture on the upper right. And finally, proposing a few changes to building facade material requirements, not a lot. This is mostly just to add flexibility, but also predictability for that high quality design that we want to see in Garner. So, we'll continue with having no metal or vinyl sidings. Sidings permitted, but we will allow building facades to have 3 types of materials, and we are increasing the amount of metal accents that are allowed to respond to trends in building and development that we're seeing. And we're also lowering the minimum amount of building that needs to be brick or masonry to 50% to allow, again, more flexibility and creativity while we're keeping those high design standards for Garner. So, as Jay mentioned, we do have these overlay districts as well. Garner previously had 8 of them, overlays and conservation districts. Again, we've introduced streamlining and flexibility. We are keeping these conservation districts. These are protecting Garner's important natural resources. And then the transportation corridor overlays will be simplified into residential arterial overlays, commercial highway overlays, and then that I-40 overlay is now going to be called the limited access highway overlay to account for that 540 expansion that we'll be seeing. So those are how the non-residential districts will be distributed, and Jay will talk to you about conditional.
Thanks. So, non-traditional districts covers, well, conditional zoning, really. And in the past, this has meant things like the traditional neighborhood development type, the planned unit development, or PUD, the PRD, planned residential development, and the MXD district. So, because of recent changes with state legislation, and specifically the Chapter 160D update, all of these districts are now being transitioned to a process called conditional zoning, whereas previously we had used the process called conditional use zoning. Conditional use zoning involved kind of the commingling of legislative and conditional use and quasi-judicial processes in order to get that rezoning and conditional use permit. Conditional zoning has been specifically designed by the legislature to be just a legislative process where council creates a zoning district and assigns it to a piece of property, just like they would any other rezoning. So basically what's happening with existing entitlements, existing districts, these PUD, TND, PRD, and MXD, which is a little like alphabet soup, these are all being transitioned to conditional zoning districts with entitlements and conditions identical to what they are. So they're going to continue to be allowed to be what they are and develop the way that they were approved originally. Moving forward, conditional zoning in Garner will be achieved through the conditional zoning process, and it'll take one of two forms. You see on the screen here 4 kind of potential conditional zoning options among kind of a spectrum of potential options. These were vetted by the steering committee, and it was decided that the 2 kind of in the middle best fit the character of Garner. And so that is that they are kind of in the middle of the private risk, because in terms of private risk, there's a lot of money that goes into drawing engineered site plans, and to have that then later denied can be a substantial financial loss to an applicant. So there's also the kind of the spectrum of whether or not a conditional rezoning is more publicly guided, as in by the UDO and by the council, or if it's more privately guided and more flexible to the private development community. And so these kind of fit in the middle there. And so we have 2 flavors of conditional rezoning, Tier 1 and Tier 2. The difference being that Tier 1 is built on an existing conventional base zoning district, the RA, R2, R4, the NC, the CMU, all the districts that Allison and I have previously discussed. It's built on that, and then the applicant pares down the uses that would be allowed in that district to just the 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, however many they actually want to actually keep. And that gives the council a little bit more certainty and gives the neighbors a little bit more certainty as to what uses might occur in that district. And that's kind of how that conditional zoning district works. And any districts, any uses within that district that are currently identified as special uses would need to come back later if that applicant chose to do that use in that district. The Tier 2 flavor of conditional rezoning would take the shape of a situation where an applicant wants to upzone a particular parcel, has kind of a conceptual master plan for how that would look, where the major streets might be. This would pretty much usually be on a pretty large tract of land. They might know that they want to put some commercial uses up on the major corner of the 2 streets there, but then they want some residential uses in the back, and so they would show that on the map. And so it gives some certainty, some additional certainty to the council and to the neighbors as to what is intended where, but it is still a little more flexible. And then it also might come with some mitigation or design standards. So perhaps this development would need narrower side setbacks, but in order to do that and still be compatible with the neighbors, this development is proposing an increased landscaping planting along that particular property line so that it doesn't, so the neighbors behind them don't even notice that it's there, or something along those lines. So that's kind of a little bit more privately guided option for the conditional rezoning. And so here's kind of how that might look. Let's say we have a tract of land and someone wants to do a Tier 1 conditional rezoning. let's say that it's currently zoned residential, and so they are proposing to upzone to the Commercial Mixed-Use District, CMU, but they want to exclude all the uses that are allowed in CMU except for hotel, retail, and office, because that's what they think they are best suited to develop there. They would bring that request forward to council, and they would either get a yes or a no based on whether or not council found that in the public interest to rezone that property. If that same piece of property came in as a Tier 2 conditional rezoning, let's say that they came in and they wanted to put a hotel, retail, or office on the major highway up front, but then they wanted to put some townhomes in the back over here and some residential over there. They would bring in a conceptual master plan that looked kind of something like this, and they would give colors to those different uses, and they would propose different standards for setbacks or landscaping where those uses butt up against the neighbors or even within the actual district itself. And then council and neighbors would have a very good understanding of where different uses would go and what design standards and development standards would go along with those uses. And then council could weigh that request and decide yes or no based on whether they decide it's in the public's best interest. And in any legislative hearing, council is of course able to listen and talk to the public and receive comments and opinions, and then weigh that against the comments and opinions of others and adopted plans and so forth that council would use. So now I want to talk a little bit, switch gears, talk a little bit about this draft rezoning map we've kind of been discussing a little bit. This is going to be available for review, and often one of the things most people are concerned about is, will they be rezoned? And the answer is probably yes, because we are consolidating a lot of zoning districts. But it's very possible that there will be little to no change in your day-to-day life or what you can and can't do with your property. And we want to make sure that you're well aware of what those changes might be, and if or if not your property is going to change in any significant way. So what's been developed is a website that has a draft remapping, and this is a very preliminary draft, so it's definitely in the stages where we're welcoming public scrutiny and comment to help make sure that it's most closely aligned with what you understand your current use of your property to be, and that we're not accidentally creating any nonconformities or other potential issues as properties are rezoned. So this map, and we'll show you the link in a little bit, because there is going to be a link on the project website that you can go to and then examine it, but you can scroll in and out. You can find your property. You can slide the slider bar from the existing zoning, which is our current zoning districts today, and you can slide that bar across to see what it looks like if it does, when the remapping does happen. This remapping is going to be necessary in order to realign properties to the new zoning districts that have been consolidated. But we want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to examine their new proposed district, get a feeling for what's permitted in that district. Maybe call and ask the planning department about what other things they might need to be aware of, and reach out. And what's going to happen is that iteratively over the next 5 to 6 months, the planning department is going to collect those comments and those thoughts. We're going to continually update this zoning map to make sure that it reflects those comments when they are appropriate and reflective of the use of the neighborhood, and are in alignment probably with the comprehensive plan future land use map that was adopted with the comprehensive plan in 2018. And we want to make sure that everyone knows that there's going to be additional public meetings and outreach in the future as we get towards the adoption of the new UDO in winter of this year, 2021. And that there's additional input at time for people to talk to their neighbors, look at the map, research more about the zoning districts and learn more about what their new zoning district might be. And then there will also be public outreach associated with the remapping, such as mailings and so forth for people that are going to be rezoned to different categories. And for the most part, that will be a great, almost the entirety of the town. So I'm going to talk now quickly about next steps, and then right before we go to the question and answer, I'm going to show you that rezoning draft website that you can go to and learn more about that process. So the next step is that we hope that anyone who's watching or has an interest will review the actual draft articles. They are available on the project website. And that is listed right here, and Jeff showed you how to get to that in the beginning of the presentation as well. Please review the draft rezoning map and the zoning district descriptions and tell us, contact the planning department to register any concerns that you might have and talk through that with them so that we make sure that we get that zoning map right. Then also there's an online survey that's going out with this public meeting, and it's going to be available for, I think, 2 or 3 weeks. And that's also available on the project website. So please take that survey. The more specific you can be about your questions or comments on the draft ordinance, the better. If you can reference a section, that's the best. But if you just have overall concerns or thoughts or guidance, though, we also welcome those, and we'll try and incorporate those as best we can and bring them forward to the steering committee when necessary to get their opinion as well. And I just want to say thank you before we look at the rezoning map for anybody who's watched this. Really appreciate your time and your interest. Make sure you reach out if you're even more interested. The project webpage is there. It's garnerinc.gov/departments/planning/garner-forward/UDO-re-write WRITE-project. Or you can just search for Garner, NC UDO rewrite in Google, and it'll probably get you there right away. So now I'm going to break out of this presentation and show you real quick that remapping webpage. And it looks something like this. So when you load it, it does take a little bit of time to load, but it'll look something like this, and it'll show you the entirety of Garner. You can see on the top here, we have the proposed new zoning map comparison for the town of Garner. There's a little bit of narrative on the left-hand side, as well as a link to the project website on the planning department's website. On the bottom here, we have the existing zoning map colors on the left and what those represent. And on the right-hand side, we have the proposed new zoning districts and what those represent. And you can kind of scroll in here, and as you slide across, you'll notice the colors change. And that corresponds with the existing zoning on the left-hand side, changing to the proposed zoning on the right-hand side. You can also come up in here and type in an address, and let's just say Pandora Springs Road, Garner, NC, and then it'll take you down to a closer level, and you can kind of see how that rezoning might change in your neighborhood. So you can see, you can zoom in, and then as you use the slider, you'll be able to see what the difference is between those two districts. And you can see it takes a little bit of time to load, so you have to be patient with it. It's about 15,000 parcels worth of information times 2. And now I'm going to take a break from this presentation, and I think we're going to open the floor to question and answer and do our best to make sure we can answer any questions anybody who's viewing might have.
Jay, at this time we are streaming on Facebook Live, and we do not have any comments at the moment. However, if anyone watching the video later on may have some comments, they can reach out with comments or questions using our website. There'll be a way to submit comments or questions, or by contacting myself, Brian Godfrey, at bgodfrey@garnernc.gov.
Well, thank you, Brian, and the team from Stewart, Allison, and Jay. We appreciate you all taking the time to come here and help facilitate this virtual meeting. Again, we understand that at this time there's probably not a lot of folks who could join us live, but we do hope to hear from those of you who watch this as a recording. Again, this is a good time for y'all to get involved. We've got 2 great opportunities for you, both again with reviewing the zoning map and to participate in the survey. We definitely encourage you to do both of those things, and we look forward to hearing from you. And please let us know how we can help you if you have any questions. Thanks again so much.